So I thought I would follow last week's talk with talking a little bit about the idea of refuge. So I get this little Zen calendar. I don't know if anybody else gets it, but so I read something that is sometimes the Zen thing, and sometimes it's something else. But today it is actually a very interesting koan uh, about Joshu, and it says, a monk came to Master Joshu and asked, "Who is Buddha?" Instantly, Joshu replied, "Who are you?" So I think this is really a good introduction to the idea of refuge in our tradition. What is it? What is a refuge? I mean, we do this chant, and but what does it mean to take refuge? And we chant it reverently and repeatedly, but what does it mean? And and in what do we take refuge, and why? So Zen is Zen, and the Buddhist tradition is all about suffering and the relief of suffering. And Zen is in particular about inquiry. So I invite you to inquire, in what do I take refuge? I think that we use the term refuge in Zen practice as a part of the heritage of the Buddhist understanding of psychology. The psychological refuge is a metaphor for an inner move of mind and heart that makes it possible to both endure and transform the suffering of life. As an external refuge, we find within our own self a sense of safety, as in an external refuge. We find within our own self a sense of safety, protection, security, a shelter from danger and hardship, where we are understood and accepted and can rest and abide. And from that place of refuge, we can see clearly and act wisely and with an open heart, because we are safe and stable. And we recite the words, I take refuge in Buddha, I take refuge in Dharma, I take refuge in Sangha. We take refuge by chanting at the end of our meditation and service, and we formally take refuge in ceremonial vows in lay and priest ordination. Classically, there are three levels of refuge: outer, inner, and innermost. And I'm sure that there are Sanskrit words for these, but I don't know what they are. And we might think of the outer layer of something like this. When we say, I take refuge in Buddha, we are saying, I accept the human being, the awakened one, as a human example of awakening. When we say, I take refuge in Dharma, we are saying, I study and practice following the teachings of the Buddha and his historical lineage. When we say, I take refuge in Sangha, we are saying, I take refuge in others, a community of support who are trying to live their lives in this way. Now, many teachers, but I'm going to draw on Jack Kornfield today, point out that this taking refuge is a kind of akin to baptism, but it is an inner move, a turning of the heart that we do again and again. So it's not just one time, but we do it again and again. And I think it might be what the Quakers call an ongoing conversion, not a single act or recitation, but a continual deepening, a continual opening. This is the experience of inner refuge. We begin to see the Buddha nature of all things. And Jack Kornfield says in this inner refuge, we take refuge, and when we take refuge in Buddha, we ask, what is this really? And we accept what Suzuki Roshi would have called things as it is. When we take refuge in Dharma, we entrust ourselves to follow the truth and live in accord with it. So you can see this is a deeper level. It's not quite so concrete. When we take refuge in Sangha in this inner way, we connect with the community of all who are dedicated to awakening. And then there is the innermost, constantly deepening level of refuge. On this level, we encounter the Dharmakaya, the Sambhogakaya, and the Nirmanakaya that I've spoken of several months ago. Taking refuge in the Buddha and in the innermost sense as the Dharmakaya, we take refuge in endless awakening itself. Awakening is timeless, unborn, unrelated to any single body, any history, any place, any particular place. Awakening is the ground of being, the truth of the open mind. When we take refuge in the innermost Dharma, we rest in the eternal freedom of mind and in the eternal freedom of mind and action, in our true self, clear and luminous. When we take refuge in the innermost Sangha, we acknowledge the inseparable connection of all of our lives. As Martin Luther King said, we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. We are a jewel in Indra's net, boundless net, reflecting and being reflected by all other jewels. And this connection cannot fail or be separated. Cannot fail or be separated. And maybe in another tradition, this is what's called heaven on earth. And that refuge can be found deep within each of us. But the problem is, my dear Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, here comes Mara. Because guess what? We spend most of our time taking refuge in all the temptations that Mara has to offer. You name it. Food, sex, being right, money, power, a beautiful home, a nice car, the perfect relationship, being a professional, rationales, traditions, philosophies, scholarship, religion, piety, spirituality, meditative bliss. What else? Being organized, being a Republican, being a Democrat or an independent, being angry, blaming, shaming, diet, exercise, clothes, shopping, you name it. All about the safety of what we think of as ourself, promoting and protecting the ego. All the props for our poor, suffering ego. We occupy our mind at any given time with any one of these things. We have to have it. It has to be this way. It has to be our way. It's no wonder that the Buddha tried to leave all of that behind and shed it and shrug it off. And that generations of monastics separated themselves from worldly concerns. But, the secret was that in the monastery, it just was a tighter boiling pot. But as lay practitioners, that's not our path. Ours is in the mud of the world, where we nurture the awakened mind and view our muddy, complicated selves and our world, the Vanity Fair of Pilgrim's Progress, with open, compassionate eyes, because our true refuge is elsewhere. It's not that the things on Mara's list are bad in themselves. It's a matter of our attachment to them and of mistakenly seeing them as refuges, as sources of safety, ultimate safety and security. to which we can entrust ourselves. And so this is not to say that we don't do all of these things, but we do it with having stepped back into the great space of awareness, and we have some perspective on what we're trying to do. So it's not wrong to have a safe place to live, and to have a car that works, and warm clothes, and so on and so forth. Or to even have opinions, but it's very important to have perspective on our positions, our views in our lives. Because I don't know about you, but most of us in our lives have found out that some of our perhaps less mature positions on life in general turned out not to be right or useful later in our lives. So, and this week I read this most poignant article, most heartfelt article by a colleague of a brilliant psychiatrist. Actually, I think he was a psychologist who devoted his life to researching happiness and writing about it. And he did some very important work. So I see Jackson nodding his head, and he must have read this article from the New York Times. And this man was very driven, and he was hugely successful and admired by his colleagues, and he died by suicide. So even great attention to happiness or winning the lottery is never the answer. And this is the terrible irony of falling into Mara's trap, of going down Mara's rabbit hole. In the end, none of these pursuits, even being successful at them, is enough. Even being able to bliss out repeatedly and easily in meditation is not it. So in Zen, this is something else that I thought about a lot of things when I was thinking about this talk. Like, I'll just say quickly that, our precepts and our metta chant that we do is all about not falling into Mara's traps. Both of them are. So you might look at them and see what you think about how they are saying, don't fall in. Maybe, yes, do all these things, but not too much. Carefully and with wisdom and compassion. So in Zen, we're not confined by God language, and yet, sometimes in personification, there is inspiration and guidance and solace that point to the true refuge of the heart. And I have loved this particular prayer since I was taking courses in philosophy and religion at Fresno State in the 80s. And it turns out that it's a prayer by Wendell Berry. And I didn't know that until, probably within the last year or two, when I came across it in something that I was reading about Wendell Berry. And so this is that prayer. O thou, far off and here, whole and broken, who in necessity and bounty wait, whose truth is light and dark, mute though spoken, by thy wide grace, show me thy narrow gate, the gate of awakening, the gate of freedom, our true refuge and home.